This speech, if was given at the Project Auckland lunch on the 21st of March, would be in reply to the Transport Minister's speech that, upon listening to it, lacked a system-wide approach to transport, while also advocating and bringing in the world masters to assist us in delivering transport infrastructure to move people around, as well as freight, more efficiently. Kia ora and welcome. My name is Ben Ross and I am a planner who has been in the field as well as its sub-disciplines for the last 15 years. I have also taught both domestically and internationally planning policy and planning techniques at urban planning and transport levels. I also do a lot of spatial planning work and advocacy in my spare time. As mentioned there, these views are of my own and do not endorse nor reflect my employer's views nor their policies positions, given I am in the public sector. On Thursday the 21st of March, Transport Minister Simeon Brown gave a speech to the Project Auckland lunch, which is hosted by business editor of the New Zealand Herald, Fran O'Sullivan, to business leaders and most likely captains of industry. I had also written at invitation by Fran O'Sullivan a short 1,500 word piece on bringing in the world masters to help us deliver transport schemes like Intercity rail between Auckland, Hamilton and Tauranga, as well as more closer to home, airport to Botany rapid transit stage 2, which is one of the key transport platforms of the current national-led regime. However, as I noted in the premise, what we're going to be looking at is how the Transport Minister is lacking in a system-wide approach, or systems-based approach, if I was to put it more formally. This can be looked at from, if you look at the announcements from the Minister as well as the Prime Minister, you will see things like the government is about to invest 20 billion into a world transport class system. However, is it going to achieve the systems-based result that we need? Now, system-based result is also another way of saying integrated land use and transport planning. So it's the two disciplines together. And why the Minister and the Prime Minister and the government taking this non-system-based approach will continue to lead towards our poor productivity, our poor mental health, environmental degradation, loneliness, living paycheck to paycheck, and so on, while the rest of the world, including the oil nations of the Middle East, are moving ahead of what we are even slashing and burning technically. And then I will look at both Intercity rail and airport to Botany, otherwise known as A to B, as two ways of bringing in the experts to help us do a systems-based transport program or integrated land use policy. As I noted, the Minister delivered the speech on the 21st of March at the Project Auckland launch. It lacked a systems-based or integrated approach. As I have taught on behalf of the UITP and as I do as a policy planner, I have to always know, and as I always teach, that transport will affect land use. And land use can be rural, industry, greenfields, that's urban sprawl, residential, commercial, city centres, metropolitan centres, employment centres, recreational spaces, and so the list goes on. So transport is going to affect how we use our land, whether it is efficient or non-efficient, whether it is with the environment or promotes environmental degradation. Land use also affects transport. So, for example, urban sprawl is going to make transit less efficient and less effective, which means you are likely to get congestion. And at the end of the day, both is going to affect how you experience the urban environment you're in, or the city user experience. In my case, I am Auckland based, so it is going to impact my user experience in Auckland. And as we know with Auckland is chronically congested, but our transport and land use planning and investment is still stuck in the 20th century, while even oil nations of the Middle East move into the 21st century and go for that integrated approach and are not afraid to use other methods that is not a 4-lane highway. This is an example of a systems-based or an integrated approach with public transport. This is the Northern Motorway with the Northern Busway beside it. One of those double-decker buses that you see coming towards you, in this case towards Bushmount or now Waitemata Station, moves that entire 3 lanes of cars heading towards the city. However, I am not just looking at the Transport Minister as well. I am looking at the Resource Management Reform Minister, Chris Bishop, who also gave a speech a day later, so the Friday, to the New Zealand Planning Institute, which I am in the middle of becoming a member of as an associate member after 14 years. And his, for lack of, well, still being polite, his patronising and dismissive approach towards the planners is not going to help in any shape or form that integrated land use transport planning we need. It is still very isolated, although it is still very 1960s based compared to, again, what the rest of the world is doing, including the United States of America, home of the highway, home of the car, home of the sprawl, but yet they are now moving more into rail, they're moving more into transit, they're more moving into active modes, and they're doing everything they can. You will see this across the platforms to bring in what's called the missing middle, so gentle residential density, mixed use, and a lot of retrofitting in previous single-use buildings. So, to quote the Minister, Chris Bishop, he said, in terms of new legislation, so that's to replace the Spatial Planning Act and the Natural Built Environment Act, the new legislation, I am in favour of clearly separating urban and spatial planning from environmental protection. This also, I can also put into transport as well with Simeon Brown, possibly through separate legislation for each of these functions. Unfortunately for Minister Bishop, and also by extension Minister Brown, given we are looking at the integrated approach, is that you can't separate the two. One is reliant on the other. Without the environment, you have nothing. Without the spatial planning and the environment and the urban planning, we do not know how we have to protect our environment. So you can see where this non-system based approach is going. Now if I flip back to the Minister, Simeon Brown, the Transport Minister, and flip back to this, for his shortcomings, his focus, and as he said at the Project Auckland launch, 4-lane highways to service endless urban sprawl, particularly single-use developments, and reinforcing the lack of choice, is giving us the situation where, as it is said here, we have made it so that automobiles, the car, can go everywhere at the expense of the children going anywhere. Followed by, we ask everyone outside of the car to be safe, so drivers that can be dangerous. These two approaches from the two ministers, and in my reply to, actually now technically both speeches, the Project Auckland speech and the speech to the NZPI, given I am a planner, and I also wrote for Project Auckland, is only going to make our negative productivity and our $10 billion liability from deaths and serious injuries on our roading network only worse. Straight off the bat. What can we do about it? As I said, we need to look at a systems-based or an integrated approach. This is to do with transport planning, but it easily integrates with urban planning. We need to focus on the people, we need to focus on the accessibility and the quality of life, can see environment comes up, integrated development of all transport nodes. So the road's not going to disappear. The 4-lane highway might, but the basic road won't. But we also bring in rail, bus, cycling, low traffic neighbourhoods, walking as well. Combination of infrastructure, market regulation, pricing, information, promotion. Again, you can see the systems-based approach coming out. Planning documents consistent with the related policy areas. We have a disconnect at the moment. Chris Bishop is not going to make that any better. Simeon Brown is not going to make the government policy statement which concerns transport any better either. Long-term vision and strategy, not tied to the 3-year election cycle. Covering a functional urban area. In our case, we are going to go interregional as well. So for Auckland, Hamilton, Tauranga, we're covering 3 areas. And we are always learning through evaluation of the impacts to facilitate learning and improvement. Swinging it right back. And swinging it right back. Transport affects land use affects transport, and both are going to affect those who live, work and visit the city, the urban environment. You can see from the graph here, and again this is what I use with my UITP training, you can see that the integrated or systems-based approach has arrows going both directions in all cases. It's not one way. It goes in all directions to show the integration, the interdependencies. Intercity rail and airport to Botany rapid transit follow this methodology done properly when you bring in the experts and you go for that integrated approach. And I will be touching on them and running through the blogs of both articles which were truncated and sent up to the Project Auckland piece in the New Zealand Herald, which you can search out, or just look for the full articles online. Links will be either in the end screen or the comment description down below. Let's get into the first myth. Widening highways reduces congestion. I am sorry, Minister. I am sorry, petrol heads. Adding one more lane is simply not going to fix it. Never has, never does, and never shall, or never will. Okay? Right off the bat. So, the Transport Minister and the government promoting the 15 roads of national significance as 4-lane highways. What are we trying to achieve here? Because this is the myth. And this has been tested and peer-reviewed and seen worldwide, including, again, the home of the car and the highway, the United States. So why are we continuing down this myth line? And it just makes the land use even worse. Another one. It needed to address population growth. Does it? No, it doesn't. Again, one more general lane. It's never going to fix it. Never has, never shall, never will. And given on our multi-criteria analysis, adding general lanes always returns a benefit-cost ratio of under 1, meaning not value for money, while they neglect investing properly in transit, biking, walking, which for transit returns usually a BCR of 2 or more, and walking and cycling will return a BCR of 5. Right up to recently, we've seen cases out of London of 42 to even 200 to 1. So for every dollar spent, $200 at economic return. And if you flip it to the land use side, what do you think it's promoting here? Highway versus alternative, well, they're not alternative modes, the other modes. Because at the end of the day, all the Transport Minister is doing is the top 2. This is the problem. This is not your solution, the middle one. The bottom one is. Time and time again, because it always comes down to the efficiencies of the mode and what land use you're trying to support. This is why A to B and intercity rail come into play, because they are more efficient than adding general lanes. At the same time, New Zealand has one of the worst international road safety performances, and sinking money into more 4-lane highways at the expense of the other modes does not improve this ranking and will not improve this ranking at all. To the point we can't actually even afford to maintain what we have, and you're wanting to add more low value for money infrastructure such as highways. And this expands out to other infrastructure because of the land use such as water, which we really can't afford and keep up with, electricity, communication, civic, which is education, hospitals, fire stations. We're already seeing there's not enough fire stations, police stations, and so on. You can see how doing one thing such as 4-lane highways rather than doing integrated rail, intercity rail and busways leads to other infrastructure suffering from poor outcomes and consequences. This speaks for itself as well. And this comes from the Minister wanting to revert speed limits to what they were pre-2020. I can guarantee rather than having a $10 billion liability from deaths and serious injuries will be up to $15 billion by the time the government has changed in 2026. That figure comes from not only the direct cost of tending the accident and also the cost of the person in hospital and on ACC, but also long-term disability if they receive one, the death, so you've loss of economic output straight off the bat, cruises with the worker, congestion from the accident, and so on. So is raising the speed limits really worth it when lowering them actually promotes higher average speeds? Systems-based approach. And this is from Austroads, which is what we follow and the Australian follows. Despite what the minister thinks, in lower speed limits, they don't actually increase travel time. Increasing speed limits do not lower travel time either. But lowering speed limits increases your chance of surviving, whereas increasing the speed limits decreases it. So what's the trade-off here, given that going faster is certainly not going to only going to get you to the next red light quicker, but lowering the speed limit not only saves lives but also promotes a higher average speed through better flow. Paradoxical? Not really. The two ministers, so we've looked at the land use or what Bishop has done, and we've also from the transport side looked what Simeon is doing, and if you were to look of where we're at with these two, they're still at number 2. Trying to do wrong better. Trying to repeat the mistake of the 1960s, thinking they might get it right in 2024. Not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Trying to have your cake and eating it too by doing greenwashing. Not going to happen either. You need to do the right thing today. Okay? Integrated approach is get the transport infrastructure in there to help people move efficiently between urban centres and within urban centres. If you want to get that productivity up, if you want to improve our mental health, if you want to improve the environment through less pollution and less noise, if you want to get the super commutes down, so that's any average commute over 30 minutes over a week per trip, and if you want to beat things like loneliness, and if you just want to get the kids out more. Also, if you want to pay less for 91, if you want to charge your battery and your EV less often, you can see where this all leads. One decision has implications all the way down the line. So when it comes to transport and urban planning, if you design the city for cars, so that's urban greenfield, urban sprawl, single-use residential, plus 4-lane highways, it fails everyone, including the drivers, because the drivers are going to get stuck in the traffic within 2 years, guaranteed. But if you go multimodal, like A to B and intercity rail, it works better for everyone, including those that might have to drive for whatever reason it may be. I'm not going to pick up those who might need to. We just shout out to you. So it helps you as well. So Hourly services between Auckland and Hamilton and 2 hourly to Tauranga help those that use State Highways 1, 2, 27 and 29, including the truck drivers. A to B helps those needing to get to Monaco or Auckland Airport. Ironically, A to B, one of these stations is Puanui Station, which is where the Intercity service stops. Double integration. So if you're in Hamilton, you could take the train up, in theory, to Puanui Station, transfer to the airport, link bus, and out to the airport. Never needing a car once. Never needing to worry about if the motorways are open or suffering a crash. Don't have to worry about paying $20 an hour parking fees at Auckland Airport. And you're also bright, chirpy, and keeping fresh as well. Because somebody else is doing the driving for you. Coming back around. My reply to the ministers is, you are not taking an integrated or a systems-based approach. You are still approaching this with your 4-lane highways and with your urban sprawl as a non-integrated approach. You are not putting land use and transport together, which has consequences to the city user experience, which means it has consequences to our productivity, to our mental health, to the environment through pollution, to loneliness, to just general well-being. We need to get towards this approach as the base approach for transport and land use and the city user experience. They are all interconnected. You cannot separate the three if you are looking for positive outcomes. Because at the end of the day, we're looking at mobility demand and how it can impact the urban form and how the urban form can impact it. Rule of thumb with this one, the higher the mobility demand, the higher negative consequences towards your urban form, or the urban form has caused it. Many people need to travel more, which means they're needing to spend more time traveling, and it's likely to cost them in time and money, which means the opportunity cost is, which is the next best thing foregone, is something lost, whether it's work, play, or at home. So when we do planning and transport, when we do the urban form, it is going to impact the transport, just as the transport is going to impact the urban form, which is going to impact our demand on the transport system, which is mobility demand, and vice versa. One of the negatives to this, which we'll get to in a minute, is this is the efficiencies of the modes. You can see which is the most efficient and which is not. So why are we catering for one and not, why are we catering for the left and not the right? I'll leave that to you to figure out and try and answer why. Okay? With transport, and we'll go back to this example as an integrated approach, you can see here with public transport in this instance, so look, as we get ready to move into A to B and Intercity, that it is quite a complex organism. There are 3 sets that we need to look at to get A to, before we can even invite the world masters in from Asia to do these 2 schemes as examples. We need to look at the planning and design. You'll see transit-orientated development there. You'll see urban sprawl being combated. Project developments and transformation. Push measures. We're looking at how to use taxes against modes that have negative externalities. The car, and technically the truck, over 150 kilometers, as push measures to these 2 alternative modes. While you also have the pull measures as well. Because if we don't manage this properly, we're going to result into this. When we build it and operate it, we risk it feeding back onto itself and basically putting everyone back into the car, which is what is happening with Auckland at the moment due to a lack of reliable infrastructure to move people around. So in this case, lack of bus lanes, lack of light rail, cancellation with the trains. Which feeds into the super commute, which we need to beat. Because the super commute, again, lowers productivity or lowers civic amenity and equity. And it also comes down to cost. As you can see, the car is more costly than using public transport, which now brings us towards airport to Botany Rapid Transit and Intercity Rail. One of the two projects where we should be asking for outside help, not resorting to the Kiwi way of we don't need them, which is couched in also rather small town racism and xenophobic mindsets, is we should be bringing in the masters who have done this. And of course there's going to be returns that they'll expect, like 35-year concessions. But if we're to get them to do design, build, own and operate, these are things we have to look at. One of the examples was intercity trains between Auckland, Hamilton and Tauranga, which houses most of this country's population and GDP, and is why it's called the Golden Triangle. At the moment, all we have is some intercity buses and the highways. I get in your car and hope there's not an accident somewhere. So, could we bring in one of the masters, Japan, to do hourly services between Auckland and Tauranga, and Hamilton, and 2 hourly between Tauranga? As I cover in this post, we can. It's not the first time, but I think it is time to get serious in bringing in the masters and doing it. This is we're not looking at the Shinkansen bullet trains here. Okay, we're using what we've got, off-the-shelf technology for what we've got. In Japan, also technically Queensland, they have trains that do between 130 to 160 kilometers an hour between their cities on the same narrow gauge, that's 1067mm, moving passengers in what they call, in their equivalent to economy, a business class. And they are very well used, believe me. So with that, using off-the-shelf technology on the infrastructure that we already have, so we're avoiding what others do by going and building standard or broad gauge for dedicated high roads, which is very expensive. We could do the following, and we can also stage this using what we've got while we get other big projects out of the way, like electrification and the Kaimai Tunnel needing to be duplicated to allow for increasing passenger services, while we've also in parallel got the increase of the freight services between Port of Tauranga and Auckland. And once we utilise what we've got while the big stuff gets going, we can start moving it up through increasing our speeds and increasing our services. And then once it's all done, we can bring everything up to their full speed of 160 kilometers an hour. The cost is always going to be, for this, the price of at least one, maybe two 4-lane highways from the roads of national significance. Again, I will put the links below in the description of where you can read this in full. But this is what this investment gets you. And of course, our trains would start as hybrids, so fuel cells and electric. So fuel cells outside of Auckland, electric inside Auckland. So we're not even having to touch diesel anymore. And that allows that extra transition until we step into full electrification to Hamilton. Because we could either do that, or we could try National's current 4 lanes to everywhere, which, if you ask me for the case studies and the evidence on it solving congestion, I can guarantee I will point you to the shelf with a grand total of 0. Pretty self-explanatory. Whereas I can point you to countless peer reviews on using rail to move between cities. Tauranga, which is 2 hourly, is an extension on, because at the same time we've also got to remember with the increasing of freight services between Tauranga and Auckland, we have to cater for those as well. So we've got to work in parallel with doing that. As it says, I just want boring things like reliable transit between Auckland, Hamilton and Tauranga. At the moment, where I'm based in the Waikato, I have to drive for an hour and a half. If this train was available at stages 2 and 3 at every hour, I would be there in best part of 45 minutes. If not less. Given the Waikato Expressway is 110 kilometres an hour in one part and 100 kilometres an hour. In fact, I would be there half an hour to the station, most likely at Tuakau, and then another half an hour down to where I need to be in the Waikato. So an hour compared to an hour and a half now. And of course, you have the 2 classes available. Where does Japan come in with this and help with the systems-based approach? Japan is famous for their transit-orientated developments, as we note here. So not only would Japan, as an example, be designing, building and operating on a 35-year concession the Intercity service, but we also get the transit-orientated developments around the stations as well. So the stations are Waitemata, Britomart, Puanui, which allows you to exchange to Manukau City Centre, to the Eastern Line, or out to the airport. You have a change at likely to be Pukekohe, and that allows you to transfer to the Southern Line for your commuter trips north. Tuaka, Pokeno, Tekowhara, Huntly, Ngahawahia, Hamilton. And if it's going out to Tauranga, it would also be Morrinsville, Tauranga, Mount Maunganui. So those are your stations. There's all your chances for transit-orientated developments. And the reason why TODs is one, it provides residential and commercial and supports industry, but it also pays for the scheme too, especially as they would own it. This is how they do it in the Northern Hemispheres, particularly Japan in this example. They build the corridor, they build the TODs, they own both, and the real estate is actually what subsidizes and funds the system. Meaning you do not need to rely on a subsidy, in our case from Waka Kotahi and the National Land Transport, Land Transport Fund at all. So again, systems-based approach twice over, supporting our population and economic growth while also not relying on the public purse. And of course, with anything with transit, better property values. Because at the end of the day, we're not asking for a bullet train. We're just asking for something simple to deliver in on this, or a similar scheme to it, so that we have a choice moving between our 3 big cities while supporting urban growth, population growth in a environmentally friendly way, both human health and physical environment health, as well as supporting productivity, and as well as supporting, again, our economic health, our mental health, and so on. Closer to home, and another project close to my heart, is Airport to Botany Rapid Transit, or A to B Stage 2. Stage 1 is currently operational. That is services between Manukau, a half-completed Pōnui station, and the airport running at all-day frequencies of at least every 10 minutes, 7 days a week. But A to B Stage 2 is another example where we can bring in the masters, possibly Singapore or Hong Kong, who have mastered this again, like Japan, with not only designing, building, and operating the corridor and stations, but also the supporting transit-orientated development around it. Again, that integrated approach that I have mentioned earlier. Because remember, transport affects the land use is going to affect the transport, and both are going to impact the user experience, my experience, or your experience with this case in using the line, whether it's to get to the airport, it is to get to Monaco, it is to get to Botany, or even possibly out to Howick if the line was extended. So, like with Intercity Rail, we need to bring in the expertise, the world masters, because we're just not good at this stuff. And I will freely admit that we're not good, without facing cost blowouts. I'm not talking about penny pinching like we have with IREX, the Inter-Islander ferries. We're just not good at this transit stuff to get maximum bang for buck. So let's bring in the outside help. Let's bring in the masters. So in this case with A to B, it's an 18-kilometre rapid transit line, bus or light rail. It allows for both. It's currently planned for bus. And it is designed to move, and it connects up a metropolitan centre, a city centre, and a major employment node, which is the airport. And you've got all the residential in between. With A to B as well, you've also got to realise it has an interchange at Pōnui Station, as we see down here. And Pōnui Station not only has the southern and the eastern lines, so you can do transfer to those. It also has the Intercity rail as well, because Pōnui would be one of the stations, so you could catch a train from Tauranga or Hamilton and come up to Pōnui and then head out to the airport. Now, as a caveat, I have done Papakura to Pōnui to the airport to catch my flight to the Northern Hemisphere both times, and I must say, worked absolutely excellent. No problem hauling my luggage up the escalators or elevators. It was done, the bus was there, the train was there. I did not have to worry about the motorway, I did not have to worry about parking. So A to B Stage 1 already works. So imagine it in Stage 2, imagine we're functioning Intercity Rail, and also on top of our commuter A to B, Southern and Eastern Line services, or even the commuter bus services in Monaco. As I noted earlier, Stage 1 A to B is currently operational. This was a bit of a hard win. Again, Auckland Transport were going to be dogmatic and only go for peak hour bus lanes. With a bit of push and shove, we managed to get all-day bus lanes, which is what all bus lanes should be in an urban area. None of this peak Monday to Friday junk. All day, every day. Because even Lambie Drive, where this is, gets backed up in the weekend. And you still got people needing to get out to the airport or to Monaco. So, all-day bus lanes, everyone. Integrated approach. As also mentioned, A to B is currently on the big list for the mayor and also the current regime. So it's on its way, and the business case backs it up. Again, I will post the links below. Now, I've put forward some alternatives to deal with Romwood Avenue, just to make it better and to promote better integration. But where do the masters come in? Well, just as Japan is the masters with rail, Hong Kong and Singapore are the masters with commuter, transit systems and TODs. And this is how you would run it through, noting the limitations we have, because of there would still be needing to be public ownership of the corridors and so on. And there's also private ownership as well, especially in places like Botany and the airport. But again, Transitway promotes better values for your property. The conclusion and benefits: the overseas experience, which at the moment is pretty poor compared to here, and keeps most of, like with Japan, Intercity Rail, we keep most of it off the public books. okay, while using expertise. We're bringing online a rapid transit system which is very much needed down here in southern Auckland. And it also supports more transit-orientated developments as Auckland goes through record population growth at the moment. In conclusion, what the ministers said, so what the transport ministers said at the Project Auckland lunch on Thursday, which I had written for that project lift out in regards to bringing the masters for Intercity Rail and the airport to Botany. What the transport minister said, followed by what the resource management reform minister said on Friday to the planners, shows a lack of a integrated or systems-based approach. It is also a case of continuing to do wrong, thinking that you might get it right, despite the fact that it has never been right in the last 64, well actually the last 70 years actually, 1954. And as a result of this disconnected approach towards transport and urban planning, we have the consequences of continued poor productivity, continued poor economic outcomes and growth, poor mental health, pollution, congestion, loneliness, and so on and so on and so on. But at the same time, even if we wanted to get switched right over to an integrated or systems-based approach, because of our dogmatic thinking over the last 70 years, we actually don't have the expertise to do this anymore. We need to bring in outside help. We need to bring in the masters. Whether it is Japan for Intercity Rail to allow hourly services between Auckland, Hamilton, and 2 hourly to Tauranga, with transit-orientated development around its stations to support population growth, to support industry, to support commerce, to support amenities, and also to support tourism. Or whether it is airport to Botany, and giving people an alternative to move between a metropolitan centre, a city centre, Monaco, and a major employment node, the airport, or those who might have used Intercity Rail, or even commuter rail, to exchange at Puanui or Monaco, and out to, again, the airport, or again, Monaco. With, again, transit-orientated developments around the stations to promote that integrated approach with residential, commerce, industry, and the big one, the ultimate consequence, lowering, so both schemes, Intercity and A to B, deliver the ultimate outcome, lowering mobility demand, because it is supported through intensification, it is supported through transport, and the positive consequences as a positive user experience, which leads to positive productivity, positive economic growth, less pollution, less congestion, less risk of a super commute, and all the ills that go with it, better amenities, better outcomes, loneliness defeated, stronger communities. Paying less for 91, paying less for diesel, charging your battery less, perverse outcome for your EV. Getting where you need to go, timely and efficiently. But to do so, unlike that tram who just ran through a tree, we're going to need to bring in help to help us regain our knowledge, wisdom, expertise, and capacity to do that systems-based approach. The systems-based being transport affects land use affects transport, and both affect the city user experience, whether you're a resident, a worker, an employer, a tourist, a visitor. I am Ben Ross, and thank you for listening to this keynote on how we can do better and how we need to bring in help to do better for positive city user experiences.